Hi everyone, Jim here of the Runners Movement. Thank you for coming, and today we're going to be discussing the anatomy of the running shoe. I feel as a runner, I like to know as much as I can about how I'm training, my nutrition, and even gear. So if I'm going for a training run, whether it's hill repeats or possibly a track workout, I want to know why I'm doing that segment of training in that block of my training time. And with nutrition, I want to see what foods pair well, what I'm going to eat before or after a training run or a race, during a race. And then the same goes with gear, especially the running shoe. So I want to know about the shoe and how it's going to benefit me so I can get the proper one for my foot type and my form. So if you have a dealer in your area that you trust, I totally recommend going to them rather than trying to buy from a big box online. They're going to be able to help you and guide you, put you in the right shoe to hopefully make your runs even better. So before going into this, I reached out to a couple running companies to see if I could get breakdowns of their models, separating like the upper from the lower, even the midsole and the outsole, but I was denied, and maybe it's because they don't want their technology shown, I don't know. So what I did was I cut my shoe in half so that way I can show you the ins and outs of the shoe as best as I can as we're describing everything. So the first thing we're going to discuss is the upper. The upper is going to ideally have a snug and secure fit. Now, of course, we don't want anything too tight, especially in the toe box and any pinching in the heel. It's usually an engineered mesh, and this mesh should be strong, flexible, breathable. And another factor for me in terms of trail running is I want something that drains well. So as I'm running through a creek and then the next few miles, my shoe isn't gonna just be a pool of water. So it's gonna drain pretty easy and then usually dry that much more on a long ultra. The next part we're gonna discuss is the overlays. So the overlays are these plastic parts on the shoe, right through here, this part through the arch area, it's sometimes in through the heel here. These just provide extra support. Years ago, they used to overlay these a lot so the shoe would be heavier and also more stiff. So they've done a great job with the technology these days to make things lighter and even more flexible, even though it's going to provide more secure fit. So again, you have these little extra overlays through here, and especially you'll see many of them have this inner overlay, which is going to provide just a little bit of extra medial support for those of us who may pronate a little bit. The next piece we're going to discuss is the heel counter. So the heel counter, of course, is in the heel. So I did some dissection of my shoe, and so here it is. It's just usually a plastic piece that fits right into the heel. And what that does, it prevents a little bit of too much heel rocking. So this would be called a rear foot varus, rear foot valgus, which when I do another episode on foot mechanics, we'll get into more of that motion. But this will sort of help prevent a little bit more pronation or supination. So pronation, what that is when the foot tends to roll in more, sort of that flat foot. Supination is the opposite, where the foot tends to roll out a little more, and you get that more of a high arch there. And we're going to go into that when we get to lasts. The next piece we're going to discuss is the tongue. So the tongue of the shoe usually will start right where the laces are on the inside here and just go straight up, and it's usually unattached, especially in many running shoes. They also make them gusseted, which is Salomon's big thing, which means it's just attached on both sides. So there's really no shifting of that tongue that you may be able to get in a normal shoe. Within the tongue, they'll have many extra eyelets to help keep the tongue in place. So that's one thing that I use on all of my lacing systems to help keep the tongue in place. This shoe, my racing trail shoe, I do have a tendency for this tongue to still slip over even though it has its own loop right in here. But down the road, we're going to discuss lacing systems. We'll have a separate episode on that and how to tie your shoes the right way for different issues you may have. So that said, going from tongue, what we're going to be doing is going to laces. So back in the day, we all had our basic flat laces, more close to something like this, where it's thin and flat. Many now have switched to like more of a round, which is okay depending on the type of material. So my Brooks Ravinas stay quite well. I'll just do a normal knot with a double knot over it, stays quite well. Another shoe company, Scott, they have the flat laces, but what I also like is they have a lace lock here. So once you're done tying your laces, they just slide into that to maintain a lock there. A shoelace I have had a problem with is something that has a little more nylon feel to it on my Hokas here. Usually, and I just walk in these, and these tend to loosen up quite easier than some of the other shoes. And Salomon's, and I've enjoyed their lacing system. I've just started my first season of trail running wearing these, and they have the quick lace. So all you need to do is just pull through, cinch down, tuck in, and you're off. Some people are worried about the laces breaking, which mine are starting to fray a little bit, but they have some great lacing kits out there to help you along your way. So one thing I wanted to talk about, which is sometimes overlooked, is the padding within a shoe. So let's say you've had a shoe for a while, all of a sudden the model has changed. What I like to do is reach in your old pair. You know, maybe you want to wear gloves or not, depending how stinky your shoe is. But just see where your wear patterns are. So for me, on my shoe right here, I have this little wear away from my big toe. So that's just something to think about. I might reach in my shoe and just find different wear patterns on both shoes, because you're gonna have one that might be different than the other. You may have a wearing on one heel, like the signs of like a pump bump, compared to the other, or you may have it on both. It's just something, a note of interest I like to tell people. And then even like the tongue, like how cushioned is it on one compared to the other? Like when you're switching out shoes, you just want to feel in there, feel around, and see different wear patterns. Like is your heel up here getting worn away like it has on this pair right here? Again, just another observation that you should take into account when you buy your new pair of shoes. Next, we're going to talk about the toe box. So the toe box, place where your toes go. Again, it should be snugly fit, but so your toes can still splay. You want movement enough so that way they don't start rubbing and also then causing blisters. So years ago in college, I had a bad issue with bunions on my toes, my big toes. And so my shoes would always wear at this point right here. You can see a little better here. So much so that I would have to cut out that part of my shoe so that way my toes didn't hurt. But nowadays they're making the outer part so much more flexible that it's not as an issue. But again, you need to find out where your overlays are, because a shoe, this trail shoe right here, usually has an extra material on the outside to protect your toes from rocks or roots. So a running shoe could be one thing, but the trail shoe could be completely different for you. So watch out for those extra things like this overlay, because then a bunion issue could be something major down the road for you. We're going to talk about the last now, a shoe last. So what is that? That just sort of helps guide you with your foot type ideally. So we have a curved last. So this is usually in a lighter weight shoe, more of a racing flat, especially spikes, or even a lighter shoe like this trail shoe right here that I use. Then you have a straight last. So the straight last is pretty much it. It's more straight. So this is going to be for your motion control or stability. It's more stiff, whereas if we go to the curved one, it's more flexible. The torsion on it, we can get a lot more twisting out of it. And this is more for, again, for someone who is a little lighter, has a little better form, doesn't pronate. If they do, it's very mild, but usually they'll say a supinator. And then we have the in-between. So this will be the semi-curved. So this is majority of your shoes, which are going to be more of a neutral to a moderate overpronator. So for me, my road shoe is the Brooks Ravena, because it has just slight medial support as opposed to something a step above like a Brooks Adrenaline or even the Beast or even this Hoka here, which is very stiff to prevent too much pronation. The next we're going to talk about is heel drop. So you'll find generally shoes will have a heel drop from 8 to 10 millimeters. So what the heel drop is, it's the height of the heel down to the toes. So it's going to be higher to lower normally. And again, the average is usually 8 to 10. Some shoe companies now will have a 0 millimeter drop, which is fine, and some people can get away with it. But if you're going to make that drop, you want to make sure you ease into it, because surprisingly 8 millimeters to 0 is a big deal, and you could end up with a plantar fasciitis issue, an Achilles tendon issue, or other possible injuries up the chain. So that's something to take into consider if you are switching to a shoe that has less millimeter drop. And again, read the specs on the shoe, but otherwise, trust your local running shoe dealer to help guide you through that process. Next, we're going to talk about the midsole. So the midsole is usually the white part all the way around the shoe. Granted, they are made of different colors now, but I just like to show this for visual. So the white midsole is made of EVA. It's ethylene vinyl acetate. And in some shoes where you want a little more medial support, it'll be a dual density area where it's just a little more compressed to give a little more medial support. So something to think about when you're going into look for shoes or buy shoes. When it gets cold, sometimes these can get a little more stiff. So if you have a shoe that's a little more flexible and you're outside running and, let's say it's 20 degrees out, this is going to be a decently amount more stiff, but if you just focus on your form, you should be okay. And then there's other companies like Adidas, and sometimes Saucony will use like a thermoplastic polyurethane. Nike has a new material called a Pebax for their Vaporflies. Again, don't worry about that. Usually many shoe companies will have that EVA midsole. Next, we're going to be looking to the outsole. So the outsole is usually made of some sort of carbon rubber. So something like this is almost like a car tire. Then you're going to have a blown rubber outsole, which is more along the lines of like this. And it can break down a little more than something like a full carbon. But again, by the time you hit your mileage mark, to change shoes, you won't really need to worry about that breakdown of the outsole. But then going into the outsole, what they've done over the years is made grooved marks through the midsole along with the outsole to provide a better ride. So the ride is just your gait pattern when you're rolling through. And you'll see different shoe companies have different patterns. So this one is a little less obvious, but you can see the creases there. More of a racing flat, even more. It's just gonna follow those grooves there, just to make your ride more smooth. And this is a trail shoe here. Again, now this one's a little more stiff, but it provides a little bit of give. And then again, back to the Ravinas here. You can see the way this extra, we call this a shank plate, will provide a medial support, but then allow that ride through the bottom of your foot as you're rolling through. So what we didn't discuss was, like AirPods, gel technology. Again, we'll get into that on separate shoe companies down the road. Insoles. So that's a big topic, especially in my sports medicine world. I prefer you just get the right shoe. I don't feel there's a need to buy an insole if you have the right shoe type. So again, trusting your local running store dealer, that's going to be key. Sometimes you can get a shoe that already has pronation capabilities, like will have a more of a medial post to prevent your overpronation. And then they're being sold an insole to go on top of that. So if you can just find a shoe where you don't need that extra insole, the better. So the next part of the outsole that we'll be discussing are lugs and lug patterns. So in trail running, that's a pretty important piece, is the traction that you can get. So up here in the Northeast, we have a lot of mud, rocks, roots, a lot of stuff to work with. So many people will go with a larger lug pattern. This is a nice one because it allows mud to get out more easily, but yet has larger lugs on it compared to this shoe. So this shoe is much smaller lug pattern, but I find is quite tacky in terms of when I get a slightly damp rock or a root, I tend to stick pretty well. So I've worn this in a race once, but usually use this one for training purposes. I've gotten a lot of looks in my races the past year and a half for this trail shoe that I use in my races because it has virtually no lug pattern to it. But what it has is this traction pattern. And I have no problem with rocks, roots, mud. Can't find this exact one anymore. It's the North Face RKT. This is Rob Carrar's shoe that he helped design. And the reason I like it is just because its tackiness when I go on rocks, and it's very light, it's flexible, it drains really well. So in terms of the lugs and traction and what you're looking for, what I like to do is I'll take my thumbs to the bottom of different soles of shoes and just try to press into it and outward and just see how much my thumb grips. And usually that's a telltale sign for me on how well the shoe is going to be out on the trails. Granted, it's not the exact science, but I found that works for me. Again, so I'll take my thumb, press into the outsole, and just see if there's any drag to it or grippiness, and that helps guide me in a decision on trail shoes and lug patterns. The final thing we're going to discuss is strength training. Whoa, I thought we were talking about anatomy of a running shoe. We are, but I want to discuss the importance of strength training of the foot and lower leg. Sometimes we're put into a shoe or pick a shoe that may be wrong for us or maybe too much of a shoe, which we then rely on the properties of a shoe to do the propulsion for us as opposed to our allowing our feet, lower legs, and on up the chain to help do the work. And the more we can strength train that, the better we'll be with our running efficiency and the ride we have out on the trails and the roads. So that'll be an episode down the road. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, jim@therunnersmovement.com. You can check out my website, therunnersmovement.com, or check me out on Facebook, The Runners Movement. So again, thank you for your time, and I can't wait to see you out on the trails.